Hi there. If you've ever been theory crafting to really any extent, probably come across several build ideas that just don't work. That's been my experience too. So here's just, I guess, more of a PSA on what builds I've tried that just don't work, or the build ideas rather that don't work. You can probably find a way around them, but the concept I was working with prevented the mechanic from functioning, essentially. First thing I want to talk about is using the Eternal Apple. Pretty common to trigger 3 war cries back to back, once you come bring the cooldown to less than 3 seconds, and just have war cries going off back to back. You do this by gaining endurance charges to maximum and then losing it. What you generally do is get 2 minimum and then have something like the small cluster jewel that says get an endurance charge every second if you've been hit recently. So that brings it up. Every second you gain endurance charge, and then every second you cast a war cry. You trigger a war cry, rather. That's the main thing here. Works out very well on lots of builds. The issue is that I was trying to find an easier way around instead of doing, whenever you take damage and go with Velocco Storm's Embrace, gain endurance charge every second if you've used a war cry recently. The only downside of this was the +1 maximum endurance charges, which you can easily, get -1 to maximum endurance charges to counter it. And then you'd have 15% more damage if you lost endurance charge in the past 8 seconds, which would always be up because you're losing it every time you hit maximum. The idea was that you cast one Warcry manually, and then you gain endurance charge, which then takes you to maximum and then triggers your first Warcry in your shield, Eternal Apple, and then you would get another endurance charge because you've Warcried again, and then because you're Warcrying every second, you maintain this chain. Except it doesn't work that way because you're not the one Warcrying, it's triggering. So what happened was I Warcry manually. It sets off the first one, maybe even the second one, because of the Warcry recently. So if I Warcry, I can gain up to, I guess, 4 endurance charges. So that's 4 more war cries that can set off before the cycle ends. Yeah. War cries triggered do not produce endurance charges in this manner, so I couldn't simply war cry one time manually and then let the war cries handle everything else. Would have been pretty nice. Another idea, using Trickster. Weave the Arcane is pretty good for mana stacking. You can do a good mana stacker here. Movement skills cost no mana. You can do cast on crit, not worry about Cyclone costing too much mana because it costs no mana. You can use Indigon and scale up your mana cost without scaling up your Cyclone's mana cost, only the spell's mana cost. The downside there was you still can't, like, your cast on crit's mana cost will still go up to the point where you can't cast it unless you have enough mana. So you'll be cycloning, dealing little to no damage because you can't trigger anything. The main way to fix that was the Lavianja's Spirit Flask, I believe. Which at that point you might as well be a Pathfinder and not a Trickster because Blast Sustain. The 30% chance to recover 10% mana when you use a skill doesn't work every single trigger of Cyclone. It's only when you first start using it. Not every single time, which makes sense. It's just not something I was confident about. So, cast on crit with Indigon, Trickster didn't quite work out. Mana cost still died, therefore the character died. And the last thing was another content creator, Wolfio, brought this to my attention in one of his videos. Broken Faith, Archon Kite Shield, create Profane Ground instead of Consecrated Ground. What this does is it drops enemy resistances by 10%, all of them, not just elemental, and increases their chance to be crit by 1% base, which is pretty comparable to the old Bottled Faith. But the issue there is that Broken Faith will create Profane Ground instead of Consecrated Ground. That's all it will do. Therefore, enemies on Consecrated Ground, this doesn't apply because you don't have any Consecrated Ground. Consecrated Ground during Flask applies increased damage taken. Well, we don't have Consecrated Ground. The Profane Ground won't apply this. Consecrated Ground created by this Flask has tripled radius. That may still work, because we're dropping Consecrated Ground. It's just this is a modifier to Consecrated Ground, not necessarily to the Profane Ground that's created by it. My build idea was a Trickster cast on crit using Purifying Flame. Purifying Flame drops Consecrated Ground, so it's a good idea to get Profane Ground everywhere, right? Well, plus 6 to the radius of Consecrated Ground doesn't apply to Profane Ground, even though you're dropping Consecrated Ground. This is just increasing the radius of it. This is increasing the radius of Consecrated Ground. So Profane Ground only drops a base radius. It does not have any increase to it. Secondly, the Shockwave only is created, or it only expands on Consecrated Ground. Profane Ground, there's no Shockwave with Purifying Flame, so your clear is severely reduced. Single target might still be decent, but unfortunately, this only changes the creation. So if you were to do a similar build to the one I did, you would not want to use so many factors that modify Consecrated Ground. You just want a simple drops Consecrated Ground. I believe there is a chest piece or a modifier. Wherever did I put it? Crusader mod. You have Consecrated Ground around you while stationary. That's probably the simplest form. And then you can use something like Divine Ire, and then you'd always have it as soon as you stop. Profane Ground is dropped. Cast, and you have base crit, and you have enemy elemental and chaos resistance reduced. On top of that, Broken Faith, if you have something like well, if you end up having no energy shield by any means, whether it's what's the notable or keystone, whether it's agnostic or you're using Blood Rage or some other mechanic to reduce the damage, to reduce your energy shield by taking damage, you can have Unholy Might, so Divine Ire would still work out pretty well. But cast on crit, this, not so much. So yeah, these are failed ideas that were still fun to test out. Just disappointing that they didn't work. So the next mechanic I'm trying to test, actually, is so the next mechanic I'm trying to test is potentially a unique curious synergy that could be featured in one of my next videos of that series. Supreme Decadence allows life recovery from flasks also to apply to energy shield. With Indigon, your mana flask recovery applies to life as well, so you have life recovery from the mana flasks, which should also result in life recovery or energy shield recovery. Now, if you combine that with Corrupted Soul, which normally you can't because these are both Legion Keystones, you can only have one of them, so you're gonna have to use the Replica Soul Tether Belt. That way you can have 2 of these Keystones. So you'd have half of your incoming damage to life, and then the other half to energy shield, and then you're probably going to be doing something like Mind Over Matter. So half of the damage that roughly, probably less than half, that goes to your life after that is taken to your mana. And if you're using a mana flask with Indigon, you're recovering your mana, life, and energy shield all at the same time. Assuming this works. Therefore, you get a similar interaction to when we used to do Pious Path, or I don't know, say used to. The combination with Pious Path allows you to do Consecrated, allows you to have the effect of Consecrated Ground apply to your energy shield as well. So then you have 6% life regen and then another 6% energy shield regen, and then you combine that with Corrupted Soul, and then you can run RF pretty easily because you have effectively 12% regen to combat all of RF's degen. With this mechanic, you should still be able to run RF on a Pathfinder stacking mana easier, because Righteous Fire's damage is split, and then split again between life, mana, and energy shield. And then the one flask can then apply to all three of them, potentially. I'll check that out and let you guys know. If you see a video on it, it probably worked. Anyway, you guys for watching, take care, like, subscribe, comment for the algorithm, follow on twitch.tv/Crutality, the Instagram Crutality Gaming, and have a good rest of your day.